You guys want to open your Bibles to John 14? We'll be there in just a second. So I watched most of this new documentary about the American Revolution that was on this last week. It was pretty interesting. There was a practice that they talked about that was, I guess, a habit of European battles that I wasn't aware of. When the battle was over, and whoever won won, whoever lost lost, and then they had the negotiations of okay, what's going to be seated and who's going to get what and all that kind of stuff. Then they would have this sort of formal show of surrender, and the losing general, whoever would come, and he would give his sword to the winning general, and the winning general would take the sword, and then he would give the sword back. And that's just how they did it in Europe. And there's all kinds of meaning, right? The losing general is saying, you have the power to take my weapon. And then the magnanimous winning general says, and I also have the power to give you your weapon back, right? And give you some dignity. And here you're still a general. You're just the losing general, right? And it's all kinds of pageantry. It's kind of this dance that we as humans, we put these things together because I think it's very important for us. It seems very important for us as humans, right? Not Christians, but as people. It's important to us to be seen and acknowledged as being right or being superior. Who's the superior? Who's the inferior? Let's make sure that's clear, right? And that's what this whole thing was. All the troops would be all lined up, and the loser comes out and says, you are my superior. Here's my sword. And the guy says, yes, I am your superior. I give you your sword back, right? So we feed that need to make sure that everyone knows who's superior and who's inferior. And I think Jesus, obviously, knows this about us. If you look in John 14, beginning in verse 28, John 14, 15, and 16 is this really long sort of monologue. There's a little bit of back and forth, but it's a lot of Jesus teaching his apostles and preparing them for his death and his really torture and death and his departure for those 3 days anyway. So at the end of chapter 14 and beginning in verse 28, Jesus says, you heard that I said to you, I go away and I will come to you. If you loved me, you would have rejoiced, because I go to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. Now I have told you before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe. I will not speak much more with you, for the ruler of this world is coming. And he has nothing in me, but so that the world may know that I love the Father, I do exactly as the Father commanded me. Get up, let us go from here. I think he's telling the apostles, or at this time maybe we should say disciples, the 12, the 11. It's going to look like the ruler of this place has the upper hand. Everything that happens from this point on is going to look like I'm losing badly. And so I'm telling you this now, so that when it happens, you may believe. And I'm also telling you that the ruler of this world is coming. My time with you is short because the ruler of this world is coming. My time's not short because he has any power over me, right? He says he has nothing in me. But I'm doing the will of the Father. He's preparing the disciples to see what looks like loss after loss after loss. And really telling them this is victory after victory after victory. And I'm telling you ahead of time so that you know that, and you'll believe it when you see it. He prayed in the garden, your will, not mine. Right? We know that Jesus was suffering. This is before anyone had laid a hand on him. He was suffering. Well, when he prays, in the moment that he prays, your will, not mine, we see Jesus fighting and winning a battle right there. That was a victory. But it didn't look like one. I mean, for him, I'm sure it didn't feel like one in that moment. But that was a victory. Let's turn over to Matthew chapter 26. Look at a couple more of these instances. Matthew 26, beginning in verse 52. This is when the Jews with their soldiers have come to arrest Jesus in the garden, and Peter has struck out with his sword. Verse 52, Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back into its place, for all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? How then will the scriptures be fulfilled which say that it must happen this way?" That right there was a battle that Jesus fought and won in that moment. But we didn't see 12 legions of angels come and win the battle, did we? We didn't see the Romans give their sword to Jesus and say, "Okay, you win." But right in that moment, Jesus knows, I can call angels and end this right now. And he knows if he had done that, he would have lost that battle. But he won that battle. Just a little bit further down, Matthew 26, go down to verse 63. So this is when Jesus is before the high priest, and these witnesses are coming, and they're saying all these things, and they say, that he's going to destroy. He said he could destroy the temple and rebuild it. In verse 63, Jesus kept silent. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God, that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said it yourself. Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He's blasphemed. What further need do we have of witnesses? Behold, you've now heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spat in his face and beat him with their fists, and others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is the one who hit you?" That doesn't look like victory. I mean, as we among ourselves fight battles and have winners and losers, and we create win and loss, we would say that looks like loss. That looks like failure. That looks like weakness. That was Jesus fighting a battle right there and winning. Doesn't look like it, but that's because we define victory incorrectly. And I'm not accusing us as Christians of defining it. I'm saying people, as humans, we define victory incorrectly. And Jesus helped us redefine that. We see him redefining that. What's interesting is right after this in Matthew's account, verse 20, or in chapter 26, Peter loses 3 battles in succession. Boom, boom, boom. Within minutes. And we have Jesus who's never lost a battle in his life, winning battle after battle after battle, so that Peter doesn't pay the price for these losses right here. The contrast is really kind of fascinating. Peter looks like he won the battle. Oh, he tricked those people. He got out of it. He didn't suffer the consequences. He's still free. He's still walking around. Well, yeah. But he lost battles to achieve that freedom. When Jesus, we're not going to turn, I mean, you can if you want to. I think it's in Luke. When Jesus is being nailed to the cross, or perhaps after he's been nailed to the cross, but in those moments he says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." You can think of many things he might have said in that moment. But in that moment, he won a battle and said, "Mercy is greater than justice." And so he as he's being killed, he asks God to forgive them. That does not look like victory on earth. And that's because on earth it's not victory. It was victory in heaven. It's victory for us. So, I mean, what do all of these victories, lead to? If you turn to Isaiah 53, there's this, I guess you could say short-lived, right? For us, it seems short-lived, suffering. But if you look in Isaiah 53, verse 10, here's what those victories led to. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief, if he would render himself as a guilt offering. He will see his offspring, he will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify them, as he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will allot him a portion with the great, and he will divide the booty with the strong, because he poured out himself to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he himself bore the sin of many, and interceded for the transgressors. Every victory Jesus won was for the purpose of taking on the consequences of our losses. I know that sounds kind of confusing, right? But just think about it. Whenever Jesus won a victory, it wasn't so that he would look victorious. It was so that he would receive our consequences. He would bear our iniquities. For him, that was victory. And his victories look so ugly, right? Every time we see Jesus win a victory in those, that especially that week, that final week, it looks ugly because he was receiving the consequences of our failures. He had to restrain himself when he's lost for him to lash out. Wouldn't have been unrighteous. They deserved him to lash out. That wasn't what the Father wanted. The Father wanted him to restrain. I think this is one of the reasons that we have Revelation, is to show us what victory actually looks like. Jesus prayed in John 17 that his disciples would see his glory. I mean, that was part of his prayer in John 17. I pray that they will see my glory. And Revelation, I think, is just kind of this little minuscule fulfillment of that. If you turn over to Revelation 19, we see a piece. And we think, okay, well, John got to see it with his eyes. We understand, though, that in our flesh, we can see and grasp the whole glory of God until we are there with him. But John describes it to us as best he can. Beginning in verse 11, and I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and wages war. His eyes are a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. He has a name written on him which no one knows except himself. He is clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which are in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations. And he will rule them with a rod of iron. He treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Dropping down to verse 19. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies assembled to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. And the beast was seized, and with him the false prophet who performed signs in his presence by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire which burns with brimstone, and the rest were killed with the sword which came from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. And all the birds were filled with their flesh. Jesus isn't just sort of cleaned up here, and receiving like a symbolic sword at the end of the battle. I don't know how much to make of this, but the losses that are talked about, the enemies, their defeat is talked about in a passive tense. It doesn't say Jesus got off his horse and slayed the beast. It says the beast was defeated. It's almost as if it would be too much to say that Jesus had exerted effort to do this. And it's just the beast was defeated. All those who had followed the beast were also killed. The prophet was cast into the lake of fire. This is not two peers on a battlefield momentarily tilted toward victor and loser. Satan and the beast and the prophet, then no one was ever Jesus' peer. And then Jesus had to struggle to overcome someone of equal strength. He's the victorious God. He accomplished the greatest feat in all of creation. And this is going to sound strange, but that greatest feat of all of creation was our forgiveness. No one understood, no powers in heaven understood how he was going to do that, because he's just. How are you going to forgive these people? You're God. You're holy. Well, Jesus did it. He was victorious. I hope some of these thoughts are helpful for us as we're partaking of the Lord's Supper. When we think about Jesus, I think sometimes we're tempted to think that, well, he was just undergoing loss after loss after loss. He was undergoing suffering after suffering after suffering. But every time he persisted through that, it was a victory. And I hope when we're thinking about him, we're thinking of him in a victorious fashion, because he's offering that victory to us as well. And I ask Nate to come forward and lead us in prayer for the bread that represents Jesus' body and the fruit of the vine that represents his blood.